Path. I'm Laura Donnelly, founder of the Healing Path Conversation Series and Dancing with Ease Body-Brain Balance. People hire me to teach them to move out of pain and to step into healing. These conversations with friends and colleagues from all over the world offer many perspectives on healing. The thing we have in common is the concept that healing begins inside ourselves with the decision to heal, and it expands outward from there. Today, my guest is Farrah Garan, and we met in Tucson a few years ago, quite a few years ago. And both of our work is centered in the body and movement, and so I'll let her share a little bit about her life and history and what she's doing these days. Hi, I'm so glad you're here.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it'll be fun. And I'm so excited to share the work that you do and just this, taking a leap, trusting, and how we know we can trust our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's something I've been exploring for a long time. I'm sure the exploration never ends. It's a lifelong journey. But it's been really alive for me lately because I've recently taken a very, very big leap. And so far it's going great. We're still in the very early stages, but I was reflecting on that because I was with a group of people that were equally invited to take a leap. And little by little, it kind of dwindled, and it came down to me and another woman. And so I was reflecting on, what it takes to take that leap. And it's possible it was just a no for them, and it was a yes for me. So that's what I've been really contemplating and understanding how the practices. So I teach Tibetan movement and breathwork practices in the tradition of my teacher Tulku Lobsang. And I've been doing that for many years, for decades. And I really strongly feel that they play a really big role in being able to tune into the heart and get those messages that provide the trust to take that leap. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's like when for me, it's like a gong. It's like the reverberation of a gong throughout my system, and it's like a tuning, right? And I got in tune with myself.
I love that word, tuning. Side note, I like biohacking, all these practical things, but I've never liked the word hacking.
I hate it.
Just a little bit of a negative association, kind of sounds a little violent. And biotuning is a word that I was playing with, because it is about, first of all, that we can tune, that we can refine that instrument. So what I practice and teach with the Tibetan Tantrayana tradition, it's really all about opening blockages in the body. And blockages also come from the mind. I mean, that's something really amazing in Tibetan medicine, Tibetan Buddhism, this deep interconnectedness of the body and the mind. But basically, we get blockages from wrong movement, negative emotions, just wrong behaviors, and just the process of aging. So these practices open us. They start to unwind and dissolve those blockages. And when that's a tuning, right? Now the energy is flowing more smoothly. And then the more you refine and tune that, then you notice those differences. Like you said, it's a big gong for you when it's a yes. It's definitely more subtle for me. I wouldn't describe it as a big gong, but almost a knowing. In general, it's like a expansiveness or an opening kind of feeling, versus the opposite would be a constricting, which is like a protection mechanism, right? If you feel a little bit unsafe, and we're talking about subtle things here, but if there's a little bit less safety, that's the mechanism to come in and close. So that to me is a no. Something is a no if I'm making a decision, a life choice, or even moment to moment simple decisions, where to go to eat, or what to eat, when to eat. Um, so yeah, so this idea of leaning into an opening expansiveness, or noticing when we're doing a constricted motion. Yeah.
Right, right. And what I love is how well, it was probably 20 years ago or so in Tucson that we met, and I was drawn to the movement practices because as a dancer all my life, then I did a whole lot of somatic practices, and for me the body is the recorder
Mm,
of experience. It's the place, well, for me, it's a place where injury happens, whether physical injury or emotional injury, and it's the place where healing happens. And so, uh, you know, I call it tensing and easing in
mm,
terms of this closing and opening. And it is, and people may have other words for it. And that I think is really part of the experiment. How, like my knowing is like this boing, and yours is more subtle. And so I think some of the teaching that happens, people think, well, I'm not getting this because I don't have the same experience as my teacher, but none of us have the same experience, right?
right. We all have our own unique experience, and that's beautiful. And that's another thing I love reflecting on, because I do feel we are all one. We're interconnected, we're interdependent, and we're also unique individuals. We each have our own perspective in this universe, unlike any other point in the whole universe. And it's all valid and beautiful. So we do need to discover for ourselves. But there's many that have gone before us that we can learn from, which is why I love being connected to a rooted tradition. But even within the tradition, I'm finding my way with it, what lights me up, because I always need to keep the play and the joyfulness. I've realized that if something becomes challenging, starts to feel challenging for me, then I need to bring play back into it. It's become a little too, but yeah, the exploration and this idea of trusting in the universe, or that's where taking a leap comes from. It means it's a jump into the unknown. We're not really sure what's there, but having some trust, which is trust in my decision making process and my guiding compass. And this brings me to the heart, which is where the epicenter for me of my decision making processes are. And I really think of the heart as a compass, as my inner guidance. Um, but as you were saying, it's a tuning process to be able to listen to those messages and decipher those messages. And for me, that happens in spaciousness. So this is where the practices come back around. They create space in my mind, to quiet that, ever never ending stream of waterfall of thoughts that we can have, to create that stillness and silence in the mind so that that wisdom can bubble up, and also spaciousness in the body, like I was saying, like to, the more we unravel those blocks and things can flow. And in the Tibetan tradition, they use the word mind actually when they're referring to the heart. So we say like body, speech, and mind. And it's really, it's about wisdom. I think that the heart is how we tap into this field of information that we're swimming in. Like I really, it's not even belief. I mean, there's math to prove it, but we really do have access to the information of the whole entire universe by going within, because it's holographic. So taking the time and the space to allow that listening, the listening and the messages to come up, is how I can cultivate trust in those messages and take the leap. And also, it's just doing it and having a good result. Sometimes you just need to try and prove to yourself that it worked out well. Yeah.
Well, experiment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Experiment. How does your body feed you messages, right? How does my body feed me messages? Somebody I might be working with or you might be working with, their message might come in as a physical sensation. It might come in as words, like even sentences across, it might show up in dreams.
Mm.
The sort of underlying premise of my work, which is, let's see if I'll probably say it backwards, but anyway, it came in a dream. I was on an airplane trying to read a book, and I needed to switch the light on or change the light. And this great big voice that just kind of echoed through the plane said, "How you focus the light determines what you see."
Mm.
And I wrote it down in my dream journal, and then I'm like, but wait, this is true about everything. If I think when I met you that this is a door opening, that's how I focused the light. If I think, oh no, my work is bad because it's not this and it's different than this, and then that's a different focus, which for me, makes my voice tight, makes my body tight. It's not useful. And to be aware, that space you're talking about, that space for me, when I make that space, I see sometimes how I'm focusing and where I could, again, fine tune my focus, adjust the direction I'm looking at something from.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how you talk about all this. It's so fun. And I'm going to mention there are several people watching, and I think that if they put comments in there, in the chats, we can see them. Oh, somebody wrote, how do you create space in your Tibetan tradition? What is the process?
Great question. Yeah. So each of the practices is creating space in a slightly different, nuanced way. So one of the first practices that we start with that's most accessible is Lujong. And it's really combining very specific movements with a breathing pattern. And it's the act of moving the body. We're massaging blocked places open. And that literally creates space in the body. I mean, in a gross level, space in the nervous system, in blood vessels, muscles, things that get blocked. So in a very real way, that's creating space and feeding nutrients to the organs, etc. But also the movements it becomes a meditation. It really, the combination of the breath and the focus, like shining your light, where you're going to focus your light. When we're doing the practice, we're focusing inward, right? So much of our lives, there's so many busy things that we do need to tend to in this 3D external world. But for that moment of time, while you're doing your practice, now the attention goes inward. And bringing the attention and awareness into the sensations of the body also serves to quiet the mind. So then there's other more specific meditation practices, seated meditation, that are creating space in the mind. Because if you think of the mind like an ocean, we're so often just functioning on the surface where everything's really choppy and there's a lot of movement. Those are all our moving thoughts and changeable emotions. But there's a depth under there. There's a deep, deep ocean. And the deeper you go, the more still it becomes. So we just need to carve out that time with that intention. So that's creating space in the mind. And then there's practices where we're using the breath to get there. But yeah, it starts with choosing to create space in your day. First of all, you need to carve out the space to do it. But then what happens is that it becomes habitual to have more spaciousness in your mind and body. So it's not just in the compartment of your practice. The idea is that it shifts how you are moment to moment in life. Yeah. Mhm.
It's an amazing practice when you start to do that in terms of an awareness and a quietness. And I was thinking about being in a swimming pool and, crowded pool, everybody's screaming and yelling, and as soon as you go underwater, it's
Right.
quiet.
Right. Right. And that's the natural state of the mind. So another metaphor example I like to use is of like a murky lake, right? There's a lot of activity, there's kids jumping, there's wind, and it's all murky. But if everything were to just pause and stop for a little while, naturally, without any effort on our part, that muddy murkiness would settle down and the water would become clear. It's the same with our minds. It's actually more natural for the mind to be in that depth and stillness. It's less natural for us to be constantly doing. There's a lot to manage. And this is another shift for me in this leap. So let me just quickly say what happened.
Yeah.
But alluded to it, but I didn't say. So I was living in Montana, and my main focus was Tibetan Healing Movement, which is how I share the Tibetan practices, as well as my new project called Humanifesta, which is a collective envisioning, passion projects. I'm so into it. It's my mission. And then I came to Austin, Texas for a conference in April. And through a series of events and doors opening and me deciding to walk through those doors with a heart-filled yes, I find myself in the position of now leasing a beautiful space. It's a house, but it's a community space and an event center where I had no intention of moving to Austin. I had no intention of starting a new business. And it was a little bit, one thing that I'm navigating is that it's, of course, taking a lot of my time and energy, which I had not budgeted for before I even knew it existed. So, on one hand, conceptually, I can feel like it's really pulling me away from my other projects. I had plans. I was going to do another live teaching series and this and that. But instead of my conceptual thinking mind deciding how things are supposed to go and the order in which things are supposed to happen, I'm really, really leaning into this yes. And even though I don't see the full picture right now, I think that if I were to create a very rigid plan, I would limit it. I actually think the possibility of where I'm being led is much grander than I can come up with. And that's already true. I've only been here a week, well, a little more than a week, almost 2 weeks. And I am meeting so many people, making so many connections of people who want to offer things in this space. And I see now how it's amplifying my other projects. So conceptually, I can feel like, oh, it's pulling me away from those projects. I'm not being honorable to those things. Now I see it's taking it far further than I could have planned on my own. And to be able to teach to the community here, I think I'll be very welcomed with the Tibetan practices. So that's the leap that I took, and kind of feels like a quantum timeline difference here. I did, 2 months ago, I had no idea I'd be in Austin. So
So part of this talk you're talking about is how your practices helped you follow your heart. So just like now you're talking about there are steps, right? That you couldn't envision. You had an inkling of a vision of what would happen if you took this step. But now that you're here, different steps are opening up that you couldn't imagine before you took the first step. And that's a lot of what I teach people is like, just take a step and pause. Let that be and see what opens up before you. And then, like you were talking, if you look down this path and you feel a tensing, well, for me, if I feel that tension in my system somewhere, in my brain, in my throat, in my body, I say, well, let me look at another path. And when I feel that, like, oh, wow, then that's the place I start. Doesn't mean I won't go back to that other path sometime. It could be a very good and legitimate path. It's and it could be a very logical path. I loved what you said too. So your logic brain, we're taught to trust our logic brain above all else. But there's other things at work, and those other things open other doors, just like you said.
Mhm.
And so is there when you start to get stuck in your brain and this feeling of I'm not being fair to my other projects, or I'm spending too much time on the new project. What do you do when that idea comes up?
The pause, just like you said, to pause. Well, the first step is being aware of it, right? And noticing. So this is observing oneself and noticing, oh wow, I'm getting really tense and stressed right now. And I'm sure it's legitimate. You know, there probably is a million things that you're overwhelmed with and need to be handled. But recognizing that, and then the understanding that even though you feel like, oh, I don't have time, that pause, whether it's for 3 breaths, which is already quite profound, a lot can shift in 3 conscious breaths, or really pausing, taking a half an hour to do practices, or a day to go out in nature. All of those things I find in my experience shift my energy, my state, my vibration in such a way that I'm showing up better. So if I stayed in that stressful, rushing place, I'm probably going to make some mistakes. I'm probably going to snap at someone and cause some damage and harm that I'm going to have to repair. Um, so those pauses help me show up with more presence and ease, which makes things go better. So what I would do, and like I said, if you're about to go into a meeting or you only have a few moments, to take a moment and pause and focus on your heart center, and taking 3 breaths, particularly focusing on lengthening the exhale. And even in Lujong, which is the practice I was mentioning before that we often start with, it's the most accessible, that combination of movements with breath. After each set of movements, we do something called Lung Rosel, which translates from the Tibetan as exhaling the stale wind, right? This is the release. Let go of the tension, the stress, the blocks, the negativity, and we bring in fresh energy. And it's super, super simple. All it is 3 breaths. We usually use the hands to rise the hands up like we're filling ourselves up. And then we flip the hands, and then we exhale using the mantra Ha. So it's like this. And you want to really completely exhale, empty the lungs with that Ha. And you do that 3 times. And it's so simple. And you might be inclined to dismiss it because it's so simple, but there's actually a lot going on. So in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it's the mantra Ha, H-A. It is one of the transformation mantras. It is the mantra of release. And the very act of creating that vibration and that sound is doing something with your body where it's helping to lift up things from the navel area, to lift up, to release them. And then also we can talk about modern science and the understanding of the nervous system. And from there, and polyvagal theory, we know that long exhales, and particularly with an aspiration, like with a sound, like ha, or humming is another good one, it tones the vagus nerve, which is the director of the parasympathetic nervous system, which means it drops us into a relaxed state. So these kinds of tools, they don't have to take long. That's why we have chanting in spiritual traditions around the world, because it's really effective. So that would be a small, in the moment, simple, accessible thing is just those 3 deep breaths and bringing the focus to the heart center, then again, we have all this research from heart math about how we can get our hearts and brains into coherence. Now, that's a powerful place to be. That's where we access our intuition, what we're talking about here. So I kind of geek out a little bit on how the science starts to prove what we can, empirically, experientially know. But if I have more time, I would do any number of my practices or meditations, but also getting out into nature is a big one for me.
It does make a big difference.
Yeah.
Partly the sky,
Mm.
space over your head,
Mhm.
actual physical space. And nature is generally bigger than our house. And so
Mm.
that also encourages the feeling of spaciousness. I'm always taking pictures of roads and the sky.
I love
But
that.
for me, it's the space and the metaphor of the journey.
Mm.
Because every time I discover the space in me, it's not exactly the same as it was the last time.
Mm.
It's still spacious, and I know that it's spacious, but it's a new time. I'm a new person. It's a new moment, and so the space feels a little different. And that's another part of the awareness that we build when we do practices. I wanted to share, Liz Donnelly came on and she said she's really excited about your new path and the
Thank you, Liz.
possibilities of a learning community.
Mhm.
And that reminded me that often when we do things, we absorb other people's energy. And you had talked about if you're feeling stressed and then you meet with somebody and you don't have all of your skills available and you meet them from a place of stress instead of a place of spaciousness and ease and openness to discovery. What could happen from this meeting? Instead, it's like I need this, or this person needs this, and I can't give it, and did it, and so all the time we're giving and taking, sharing energy, and so the more we do these practices that bring us into a kind of a spacious, calm place. I've had the experience where somebody else was pretty angry, and I just keep making the space in me, and eventually, no, we don't necessarily get to the same page that day, but they come down a little bit. Their energy follows my energy, and I have to work really hard not to follow theirs, because that's how we are as human beings. Kind of, we are just changeable, which is one of the beautiful things about this healing practice that you talked about, is that when you start a practice, you can learn to pause. You can learn to make a different choice. You can learn to pause and say, I need to go outside, or whatever. And so then with these little tiny changes, we step onto a path of healing and learning to trust our heart. And I was going to, you said you had a gift for people who watch. Um, and the most, where's it coming? The most, there, I can read it on the screen. The most treasured Tibetan exercise. And I wondered when you were doing the breathing, see, I really want to do that was this exercise, or if there are different, if the most treasured one is a different one.
It is a different one. It's Chaktsala, which is the prostration. And the prostration is amazing. It's amazing. And so what I have, the gift is, it's actually a 3-part video series. So in the first video, I give some of the understanding of what's going on. There's a lot of things going on with this exercise. So it's a movement, but it's like a seed exercise, or we call it in the Tibetan tradition, we would say a king exercise, which just refers to the fact that it covers the whole entire body. In one exercise, you're touching everything. In addition to that, it's working on balancing the 5 elements. It's opening the chakras, and there's things happening on the energetic level as well. So so then I teach the exercise, and there's also a handout, so you're given everything you need to be able to do it. And then I also, in the third video, talk about another layer to it, and this is bringing in the heart. This is when the real magic of the exercise, because you're already doing a lot of good with the physical positions that you're putting yourself in and the motion itself. But when we add this layer of devotion, and now here we're bringing the power of the heart into it. Um, there's a reason why this exercise is so revered in Tibet, and it's often, in many of the tradition, in the tradition, many of the practices, you kind of need to earn. You need to be at a certain level before you're taught the practices, and so doing prostrations is the most common preliminary practice because it prepares you. It prepares your heart, your body, your speech, which is your breath and action. So I love it. And I created that 3-part video series, and soon I'm going to lead a 7-day challenge with it. So I want people to learn it, and then I feel strongly called to encourage people to do it as much as possible. So I'm in the process of creating something where I show up with you 7 days in a row. We have a slightly different focus every day, and we create that consistency of our practice and really connect to it. So that's what that is.
Awesome. Awesome. And so people can get this, and the link is in the description, and the link is I'll put it again in the comments. And also, when you have your challenge together, come back and put it in the comments. So
Okay.
people can find it, and if they watch this and they say, wait, what is the challenge? And there it is in the comments, so they can find it. And I'm sure that if I hide this one, I can put the other one on. Everything will be here on your website, right? Like classes or workshops or online videos or anything.
And it's about to start to, things were a little quiet for a while with me, but now with the space, which I'm actually in right now, I'm going to start offering workshops, live workshops, but I'm going to ask someone to come help me to set it up so that I can also stream those at the same time. Because I know my students and my community are around the country and around the globe. So I think that's a really beautiful combination, because I love being in the room with people, but to also be able to open up those teachings to those of you who can't be physically present. So yeah, look out for that. I'm gonna start doing those weekly.
Wonderful. It's really exciting. And I think that I hope people get in touch with you through your website or through the comments on any of these videos, and learn more about what you're doing. It's what I love about healing is everything is going to the same center source, which is the wholeness of the person. And everybody can take whatever path they need to get there. Some people may write. Some people may, I don't know, do a million different things. But if it brings them into their own alignment with their whole being, then they are doing healing work for themselves and for everybody they come in contact with.
Absolutely. Yeah, that alignment is key. And we do need to take responsibility for ourselves. And it is more responsible to take those pauses and notice when you're stressed out and take care of yourself. Take the responsibility to keep yourself in a good, well state, because by far that's how you're going to be more helpful to people. That's how you're going to show up more and be that beacon, either overtly or more subtly in how your heart is moving. Like you said, it does affect the people around you. Your presence has a positive benefit on others. So, take that responsibility, take the time, create the space to do that. because we're given this beautiful vehicle, and it has amazing possibilities that we're only beginning to tap into, superpowers. But the first step is moving from that stressed, closed place to the more spacious, open-hearted place. And also recognizing, I mean, I'll close by saying, for me, it's an understanding that there are different ways of knowing. And in our society, we so much put emphasis on just one way of knowing, which is that cognitive thinking mind. And that is one way, and logic and those things are important. But there are other ways to know how, what's right for you and what direction to take your life in. And that's tuning in to the heart is one. And then I also feel the gut. There's another really powerful energy center beneath the navel we work with in Tumo, and it's called the Dantian in other traditions. So I feel that each of those three epicenters gives us ways of knowing, and then the diffusion throughout the whole entire body, like your gong, the nervous system. So we can learn our skills with all three ways of knowing, and be guided by an intuition that we can trust, and that leads us down such a beautiful path. And then we create these magical, joyful lives. And I'm super optimistic about it. I mean, this event space here, it's called the Portal. And for me, it's the portal to our resonant, harmonious society, because that's what I'm here for. I'm very, very optimistic that we are creating a beautiful society. And I'm not ignoring all the things that are wrong in the world. I'm very aware of them. I'm not pretending. But at the same time, I know enough. I know enough about human innovation and about all the solutions and cutting edge things that we have, and the beauty that happens when we co-create with each other, coming from the place of that compassionate heart. So this is a place where I want to seed that. It's an incubation of ideas. It's a place where we embody who we need to be to create that society. So we need to become those people through these practices, through creating space and connecting with our hearts and connecting with each other. So I could go on and on, obviously. I'm kind of excited. But
No, I'm so
life is
glad.
beautiful.
Yeah, and thank you so much. And the thing you said, it's each person making this journey, and not saying, well, as soon as all this out here is fixed, I can start. No, we start right now,
Yes.
right here, in the middle of chaos, in the middle of what's not going right. How do we create space? How do we create a little bit of calm, a little bit of ease, so that we don't perpetuate that chaos? And from this place of calmness, I'm sure you're finding this as you build your center. I like the name. I love the name, the Portal. It's really great. That when you start from this place, you're less likely to try to change somebody else. You share what works for you, and you invite them to explore that for themselves. And in that way, they change and they leave the chaos. And as more and more people leave the chaos of their own free will, then change happens. And like classes, I really like classes because the community energy augments the personal energy. And I think that that's beautiful. So thank you for the gift that you're sharing with all the listeners. And thank you for your time and sharing your beautiful heart and your path.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. You're doing beautiful work as well. And the conversation, I love what you offer, and this joyful ease. Yeah. So thank you so much for having me and for your work.
Thank you. Take care. Have a great day.
Bye. Bye, everyone.